Remember that song, that sequence? That man right there, that was the Donald Trump that was sold to the American people for 14 seasons on TV. From this network, from this building, viewers saw the helicopter and the plane and the limo, the trappings of a self-made billionaire who was living the life thanks to his business savvy.
It has not been easy for me. And, you know, I started off in Brooklyn. My father gave me a small loan of $1 million. I came into Manhattan, and I had to pay him back, and I had to pay him back with interest. But I came into Manhattan, I started buying up properties, and I did great.
But a New York Times investigation into the Trump family finances reveals that small loan of $1 million was actually closer to $60 million and never repaid. The Times article, 18 months in the making, coming in at more than 13,000 words. I've read shorter books. Offers an exhaustive look at the source of Donald Trump's wealth. It finds, quote, President Trump participated in dubious tax schemes during the 1990s, including instances of outright fraud that greatly increased the fortune he received from his parents. The Times investigation, based on a vast trove of confidential tax returns and financial records, reveals that Mr. Trump received the equivalent today of at least $413 million from his father's real estate empire, starting when he was a toddler and continuing to this day. In a statement to the Times, a lawyer for President Trump called the Times report, quote, 100% false and highly defamatory, saying there was no fraud or tax evasion by anyone. President Trump had virtually no involvement whatsoever with these matters. Well, here to talk to us about all of it, New York Times reporter Ross Buettner, one of the co-authors of this extensive report, and the Pulitzer Prize-winning Washington Post reporter David Fahrenthold, who covers the president's businesses and conflicts of interest. Russ, first, you just mentioned to me in the break, the synopsis of your story is 2,000 words long. So I'm going to ask you to do the impossible. For the people rushing to their devices and printers, for the people who didn't take the latter half of the day off to read it, what is the takeaway versus the story we were told on The Apprentice, the story we've been told for years?
Well, the story you've been told for years is that Donald Trump received $1 million loan from his father sometime around when he was starting, and he had to pay it back with interest, and that was the sum total of the sort of parental support he received. That's wholly untrue. He began receiving money from his father when he was 3 years old. His father gave Donald Trump and his siblings land and then started paying them rent on that land, and the land on which his biggest apartment buildings were built. And then the thing just progressed from that, growing to $5 and $10 million a year when he was in his 40s and his 50s. And then one interesting part of the whole thing is he's tried to portray his father's fortune as too small to be of interest to him. But there are clear signs that all through the 80s and the 90s, they were taking very aggressive, sometimes apparently illegal maneuvers for him to grab even more of his father's fortune before he ever passed away.
Was the setup to make this kid wealthy from a young age, this kind of flow-through system about which you write so much about shell companies and the like?
Absolutely. I mean, it's very clear Fred Trump was very forward-thinking in trying to pass his wealth along to his children. He was a relatively young man when he began that process. He had 5 children. He had put up some buildings for returning vets from World War II. On his way to being very, very rich, but not yet totally there, but already setting up trust funds to begin passing that along. And over the years, as Donald emerged as the favorite chosen son, more and more of that money went to him as opposed to his siblings.
David, I need not stress to you that some nights it's the Post journalism we're talking about. This just happens to be the New York Times turn. I know I join you in tipping hats toward them. This story that Russ and his colleagues have contributed to, the question to you, David, what could come from all of this?
Well, in a legal sense, we've already seen the New York State Department of Taxation has said they might open an investigation. I think you might see investigations in New York City and New York State, which would have been deprived of lots and lots of tax payments under the system, in addition to the IRS. Journalistically, This is an amazing story, and one of the things that I really love about it is it gives us a template for where to look next. The schemes that Donald Trump's father and Donald Trump himself employed to avoid income tax, it gives us a place to look. Okay, did they repeat those same schemes in other contexts? Is this something that's happened more recently under Trump's own leadership and not under his father's?
David, do you think we will see, and I guess this calls for a judgment on your part, but you lived this story too, do you think we will see the president's tax returns in our lifetime?
You're really asking me if Democrats will ever win control of any House of Congress, because I don't think Donald Trump will ever give them up. If the Democrats do take either House of Congress, they will have the power to request, and if they want to make public the president's tax returns, I imagine that they will if they have that power. There's some other things like some lawsuits that are going on regarding the emoluments clause, where there could be some discovery. It's possible those could lead to the revelation of the president's tax returns, but unless the Democrats get political power and use that power to get those returns, I don't think we'll ever see them.
Because the secret of life is timing. These are live pictures from Andrews Air Force Base as the president has landed from tonight's rally in Mississippi. Reminder, the First Lady is on her trip on the African continent in Ghana. First stop on her trip. He will now switch to Marine One, fly over to the White House. Russ, just for the folks who are going to read it, have already read it, is there any way to explain to lay people the effort that went into this? How many months, how many people, how many lawyers, how many words?
of our effort. So it was an 18-month effort. Three of us, my colleagues Sue Craig and David Barstow, much of that locked in a room with the shades drawn. We brought in a group of sort of pocket advisors, very experienced trust and estate attorneys, accountants and whatnot, who we could run by our findings as they came up. And then we also developed a network of sources of people who were in and around the Fred Trump, Donald Trump empire during the pertinent years here. And then through that process, gained access to a couple hundred tax returns related to Fred Trump's businesses, his general ledgers, his bank statements, and we were able to collate all that into a sort of cohesive narrative of what transpired.
On top of everything else, you must now deal with environmentalists because I'm told you're a tree killer. They added 8 pages. Apparently there's a print version of the New York Times website that they put out every day, and they added 8 pages to the print run. That meant bringing in union typesetters and printing workers tonight for the New York Times. So maybe you've made the holidays more joyous for some families, and there are some trees in the Pacific Northwest that are no more. Obviously, our message to the viewers is that we hope everyone takes the time to read your piece of journalism.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.